On the night of December 19th, 1944, American tank crews believed their Shermans could fight German Panthers on equal terms. They were wrong. And within 72 hours of discovering the truth, the entire way America fought the war in Europe would change forever. 21:47 hours. Supreme Headquarters Allied Expeditionary Force, Versailles, France. Snow drifted against cobblestones outside while General Dwight Eisenhower stood motionless in a cold intelligence room, fingers laced behind his back, eyes fixed on photographs scattered across metal. Overhead bulbs cast harsh shadows across grainy images of a German Panzer V Panther captured intact near Ericourt 3 weeks prior. The tank hadn't been destroyed in combat, the crew simply ran, abandoning their machine after American artillery severed a track. What recovery teams discovered locked inside that steel hull would rewrite armored doctrine across the European theater before the week ended. Eisenhower commanded logistics, not tanks. He understood supply chains and combined operations better than most officers understood their own armor. But the data before him required no technical expertise, only the ability to read numbers. And the numbers were catastrophic. Engineers from the U.S. Ordnance Department had spent days dismantling the Panther at a depot near Nancy, France. They documented every component, measured armor thickness, tested turret traverse speed. They calculated effective range of the 3-inch KWK 42L70 gun. Their report, compiled in weeks and delivered to SHAEF, arrived clinical, factual, devastating. The Panther's frontal armor measured 3.1 inches at 55 degrees. Effective thickness from the slope exceeded 5.5 inches. American M4 Sherman tanks, the backbone of Patton's Third Army and Bradley's First, carried 3-inch M3 guns. Maximum penetration capability was roughly 3.5 inches at 500 yards under ideal conditions. Against the Panther's glacis plate, the Sherman's main gun was worthless beyond 200 yards. Even at close range, penetration wasn't guaranteed. The report didn't soften the blow. It stated in sterile engineering language that a standard Sherman could not frontally engage a Panther at combat distance and expect to survive. The Panther, by contrast, could kill a Sherman from over 1,500 yards away. Eisenhower read the conclusion twice, then reached for his armored warfare liaison. This wasn't entirely new intelligence. Tank crews had been screaming about Panther superiority since Normandy. After-action reports from Villers-Bocage in June described how a single Tiger commanded by SS Obersturmführer Michael Whitman annihilated an entire British armored column in 15 minutes. American crews in the hedgerows whispered bitterly about Panther country and death traps. First contact with Panthers had been a brutal education. Near Saint-Lô in July, a company of Shermans from the 3rd Armored Division encountered 3 Panthers in a sunken road. The fight lasted 4 minutes. 7 Shermans burned. The Panthers withdrew unscathed. The company commander, whose tank alone survived, reported his gunner landed 3 hits on the lead Panther's frontal armor. All 3 rounds bounced off. The sound, he said, resembled hammering a church bell. The German tank never even slowed. Stories like that infected the armored divisions. Crews began calling the Sherman a Ronson, after the cigarette lighter company whose slogan promised, "Lights first time, every time." Dark humor masking grim reality. The Sherman's gasoline engine and ammunition storage ignited easily when penetrated. German tankers called them Tommy cookers. But field reports are one thing. A captured tank stripped to its rivets, measured with engineering precision, is another entirely. The data eliminated all ambiguity. It proved what tankers already knew in their bones. American armor doctrine had been built on a false assumption. That assumption stated, American tanks were designed for infantry support and breakthrough exploitation, not tank versus tank combat. The M4 Sherman was reliable, mass-produced, mechanically superior to anything Germany fielded in terms of engine longevity and repair simplicity. But in direct combat, it was outgunned and under-armored. The Ordnance Report didn't just catalog the Panther's armor. It included detailed schematics of internal layout, fuel storage, ammunition placement, crew positioning, vision ports, weak points. And here, in the technical autopsy, something unexpected surfaced. The engineers noted the Panther's frontal armor, while nearly impervious, created a critical design vulnerability. German tank crews, confident in frontal protection, had developed a tactical habit: engage at range, hull down, presenting only turret and upper glacis. But the Panther's sides, thin to manage weight, measured only 1.6 inches, vulnerable to the Sherman's gun at close range. Vulnerable even to the 1.5-inch gun on the M5 Stuart light tank if the angle was right. The report documented something else. The Panther's transmission was a mechanical catastrophe. It failed constantly. The final drive, mounted in the front hull, absorbed enormous stress from the tank's 45-ton weight and 700 horsepower Maybach engine. In the field, Panthers were often immobilized not by enemy fire but by their own engineering flaws. Captured German maintenance logs revealed the average operational lifespan of a Panther transmission was roughly 93 miles before requiring major overhaul. Eisenhower underlined this section with a pencil, then picked up the phone. 23:10 hours. A call went through to 3rd Army headquarters in Luxembourg. General George S. Patton was asleep. His aide woke him. The conversation lasted 11 minutes. No transcript exists, but what followed became a matter of record. By 0200 hours on December 20th, new tactical guidance was being drafted and distributed to all armored divisions under Patton's command. The orders were explicit. American tank battalions were no longer to engage Panthers frontally unless no alternative existed. Instead, they would use mobility, combined arms coordination, and flanking maneuvers to force German armor into disadvantageous positions. Tank destroyers, specifically the M10 and M18 Hellcat, carrying the more powerful 3-inch and 3.5-inch guns, were to be prioritized in anti-armor roles. Shermans would focus on infantry support and exploitation, the roles they were designed for, leaving Panther hunting to platforms better suited for it. Additionally, and this was critical, infantry-tank coordination was to be intensified. American doctrine already emphasized combined arms, but the new guidance made it mandatory. German tanks, even Panthers, were vulnerable to infantry-carried bazookas, particularly the newer M9A1. It could penetrate 4.7 inches of armor at close range. If a Sherman couldn't kill a Panther frontally, a two-man bazooka team could disable it from the flank or rear. The guidance also addressed something psychological: morale. Tank crews had been told their Shermans were adequate. Now they were being told the truth. The Sherman wasn't a Panther killer. It didn't need to be. The American advantage wasn't individual tank superiority. It was numbers, logistics, air support, and combined arms execution. 5 Shermans properly coordinated with infantry and artillery could destroy one Panther. Not through brute force, but through maneuver and concentrated fire. Patton understood this. He'd watched it work at Ericourt in September, where his 4th Armored Division destroyed over 200 German tanks while losing fewer than 50 Shermans. The key hadn't been gun-to-gun duels. It had been movement, surprise, combined arms. Now that philosophy was being codified into formal doctrine. This shift didn't happen in isolation. Intelligence from the captured Panther fed into a broader reassessment of American armor strategy building since summer. British forces, facing the same problem with Cromwell and Churchill tanks, had already begun deploying the Sherman Firefly, a modified M4 mounting a British 17-pounder gun capable of penetrating Panther armor. American crews requested similar upgrades, but production realities and logistical constraints made widespread adoption impossible before war's end. Instead, the solution was tactical, derived directly from what Eisenhower found inside that captured Panther. The tank itself, after being studied, was shipped to Aberdeen Proving Ground in Maryland for live fire testing. Engineers fired captured German 3-inch rounds at it from various angles to confirm penetration data. They fired American 3-inch, 3-inch, and 3.5-inch rounds to establish effective engagement ranges. The results validated field reports. They also revealed something else. The testing protocol was methodical. Engineers measured exact armor composition using spectrographic analysis. They discovered the steel contained lower percentages of nickel and molybdenum than pre-war German specifications called for. Germany's access to these alloying elements had been severely restricted by 1944. Swedish iron ore shipments, while still arriving, couldn't compensate for loss of Soviet sources after 1941. The result was armor that was harder but more brittle. In one test, an American 3-inch armor-piercing round struck the Panther's frontal glacis at 30 degrees obliquity from 800 yards. The round didn't penetrate, but when engineers opened the hull, they found the interior armor surface had fractured, dozens of small steel fragments ricocheting through the crew compartment. In real engagement, those fragments would have wounded or killed the crew even without complete penetration. A second test using high-explosive rounds confirmed another vulnerability. When multiple HE shells struck the same armor area in rapid succession, cumulative stress caused microfractures. The plate weakened significantly. After 5 4-inch howitzer rounds impacted within a 2-foot radius, a follow-up armor-piercing round penetrated armor that should have stopped it. This information was immediately classified and distributed to artillery commanders. The Panther could be defeated not just by flanking, but by concentrated fire support. 3 or 4 artillery shells, followed by a well-placed tank destroyer round, could kill a Panther from the front. The intelligence also noted the Panther's optical systems. The gunner's sight, a term Zielfernrohr 12, was excellent, one of the war's best. But it required the turret to remain still during engagement. Any violent maneuver threw off the sight picture. American tankers were instructed to keep moving, never stop, even if it meant sacrificing accuracy. Movement made them harder to hit, and a moving target, even one less accurate, could survive long enough to flank. By late December, these tactics were being tested in real time. The Battle of the Bulge had begun on December 16th, 3 days before Eisenhower examined the Panther report. German armored spearheads, including large numbers of Panthers and Tigers, had smashed through American lines in the Ardennes. The situation was desperate, but lessons from the captured Panther were already being applied. At Bastogne, surrounded American forces used combined arms tactics to hold off German armor. Tank destroyers positioned in ambush knocked out advancing Panthers from the flanks. Infantry with bazookas infiltrated German lines at night, disabling tanks while they refueled. One engagement documented in the 705th Tank Destroyer Battalion's after-action report illustrated the new approach perfectly. On December 22nd, 4 M18 Hellcats from C Company set up a hasty ambush on the road to Bastogne. They positioned behind a stone farmhouse, hull down with clear lines of fire across open ground. When a column of 5 Panthers approached, American crews held fire. They waited until the German tanks were within 800 yards and presenting their flanks. The engagement lasted 90 seconds. 3 Panthers were destroyed. One caught fire immediately. The second took 2 hits to the turret ring and stopped moving, its crew bailing through hatches. The third was struck in the engine compartment and burned slowly, black smoke rising into gray winter sky. The remaining 2 Panthers reversed into the tree line and didn't re-engage. The Hellcats withdrew before German artillery could range them. 90 seconds, 3 kills, no American losses. It wasn't luck, it was doctrine derived directly from studying that captured Panther. The M18's 3-inch gun fired from a flanking position at medium range was lethal. The Hellcat's speed, 55 miles per hour on roads, allowed it to reposition before the enemy could respond. Mobility and firepower, properly coordinated, defeated armor. And when Patton's Third Army broke through to relieve Bastogne on December 26th, his armored columns moved with new tactical clarity. They didn't fight Panthers head-on. They went around them. The Germans, committed to a doctrine of frontal superiority, found themselves outmaneuvered. Panthers immobilized by terrain, mechanical failure, or fuel shortages were bypassed. American forces didn't stop to engage every enemy tank they encountered. They pushed forward, leaving isolated German armor for follow-on forces. Speed, not firepower, became the decisive factor. This wasn't a miracle, it was institutional learning. The U.S. Army by late 1944 had developed a capacity for rapid doctrinal adaptation few other armies possessed. When a problem was identified, solutions were tested, refined, disseminated quickly. The captured Panther didn't reveal anything American tankers didn't already suspect, but it confirmed it. And confirmation, backed by engineering data, gave commanders confidence to change tactics officially. Eisenhower's role was crucial. He wasn't a tanker, but he understood the importance of intelligence. When the Panther report crossed his desk, he didn't dismiss it as technical curiosity. He recognized it as actionable intelligence, and he acted. The story doesn't end with tactical adjustments. The Panther report also influenced post-war American tank development. Lessons learned from studying captured German armor fed directly into design of the M26 Pershing. It entered service in February 1945. The Pershing mounted a 3.5-inch gun capable of defeating Panther armor at combat ranges. Its frontal armor, while not as thick as the Panther's, was better angled and made from higher quality steel. It represented a shift in American armor philosophy, moving from the good-enough pragmatism of the Sherman toward qualitative superiority. But in December 1944, the Pershing was still months from deployment. The men fighting in the Ardennes had Shermans, and they had new orders. Those orders were specific and unambiguous. Tank commanders were instructed to avoid frontal engagements with Panthers and Tigers unless absolutely necessary. Instead, use terrain, smoke, and maneuver to force German tanks to expose their flanks. If frontal engagement was unavoidable, multiple Shermans were to concentrate fire on a single target, aiming for vision ports, the gun mantlet, or turret ring, weak points identified in the Aberdeen analysis. Infantry coordination was emphasized heavily. Rifle squads were to advance with tanks, providing security against German Panzerfaust teams. Meanwhile, their own bazooka teams positioned for flank shots. The M9A1 bazooka, which had entered service in September 1944, could penetrate the Panther's side armor at ranges up to 150 yards. Properly employed, a two-man team could disable a 45-ton tank. Artillery support became integral to anti-armor operations in a way it hadn't been before. Forward observers were trained to call fire missions specifically designed to suppress German armor. White phosphorus rounds created thick smoke screens. They allowed American tanks to close distance or reposition without being engaged at long range. High explosive concentrations, as Aberdeen tests had shown, could weaken armor and force crews to button up. This reduced their situational awareness. These weren't abstract theories. They were practical measures, tested under fire, refined through bitter experience, now codified into doctrine. The captured Panther had provided the empirical foundation. The battles of late 1944 provided proof of concept. The night Eisenhower called Patton, he didn't give a speech. He didn't outline grand strategy. According to staff officers present, he simply said, "George, the Panther report came through. You need to read it and you need to adjust." Patton, never one to accept limitations, reportedly responded, "Adjust how?" Eisenhower's answer was brief. "Stop fighting them the way they want to be fought." By morning, the orders were out. The Third Army began moving differently. The captured Panther itself, after its time at Aberdeen, was eventually scrapped. Its components studied, measured, cataloged, then melted down. The intelligence it provided, however, remained. It was compiled into training documents, distributed to armor schools, used to train the next generation of American tankers. The specific vehicle, serial number 435, was gone, but what it taught endured. There's a tendency when examining World War II to focus on the dramatic, the D-Day landings, the Battle of Stalingrad, the atomic bomb. These were decisive moments, certainly, but wars are also won in maintenance depots, in engineering labs, in quiet rooms where men study enemy equipment and ask, "How do we beat this?" The Panther was objectively superior to the Sherman in direct combat, but war isn't a duel, it's a system, and the American system, built on logistics, adaptability, and combined arms coordination, found ways to neutralize the Panther's advantages. Not by building better tanks, though that would come, but by fighting smarter. German armor doctrine, by contrast, remained rigid. The Panther was designed to dominate in frontal engagements, and German commanders used it that way. When American forces refused to fight frontally, the Panther's strengths became less relevant. A tank that can kill at 1,500 yards is only useful if the enemy presents itself at 1,500 yards. If the enemy closes to 200 yards from the side or doesn't engage at all, the gun is irrelevant. This is what Eisenhower understood. This is what the captured Panther revealed. Not just technical specifications, but a fundamental truth about how wars are fought. Superiority in one domain doesn't guarantee victory. Adaptability does. The orders issued on December 20th weren't revolutionary. They were practical. But practicality applied consistently wins wars. Sherman crews who fought in the Bulge, who later pushed into Germany, who crossed the Rhine and drove toward Berlin, they didn't have better tanks than the Germans, but they had better tactics, and that made all the difference. In the archives of the U.S. Army Armor School at Fort Moore, Georgia, formerly Fort Benning, there's a file marked Panther Analysis, December 1944. It contains the engineering report, the tactical guidance issued to Third Army, and a series of after-action reviews from units that applied the new doctrine. The file is rarely accessed. Most visitors to the archives are interested in more famous battles, more celebrated commanders. But that file represents something essential. It represents the unglamorous, meticulous work of understanding your enemy, of taking time to study a captured tank, to measure its strengths and weaknesses, and to translate that knowledge into actionable tactics. It represents the institutional capacity to learn, adapt, improve. Eisenhower didn't win the war because he found something magical inside a Panther tank. He won because he understood that intelligence, properly used, is a weapon as powerful as any gun. And when that intelligence reached him, he didn't ignore it, he acted. Patton, for his part, implemented the new guidance with characteristic intensity. He drove his staff hard to ensure every battalion commander understood the changes. He visited units personally, explaining the rationale, answering questions, making the message clear. American tankers weren't inferior. Their equipment was different, and different equipment required different tactics. The impact was measurable. In January 1945, as the Bulge was reduced and American forces resumed the offensive, tank loss rates improved. Sherman still burned, men still died, but the losses became more proportional to the gains. The ratio of American tanks lost to German tanks destroyed began shifting in favor of the Allies. Not because the Sherman suddenly became a better tank, but because it was being used more effectively. By February, as the Allies pushed toward the Rhine, German armored resistance was collapsing. Not from lack of tanks, Germany still produced Panthers until the final weeks of the war, but from lack of fuel, lack of trained crews, and the relentless application of combined arms pressure that gave them no room to maneuver. The Panthers' advantages, real as they were, couldn't overcome systemic collapse. The story of the captured Panther is, in many ways, a story about the limits of technology. The Germans built excellent tanks, the Panther, the Tiger, the King Tiger. These were formidable machines, but they were also expensive, difficult to produce, mechanically unreliable, and logistically demanding. They represented a philosophy of warfare built on qualitative superiority. One German tank should be worth 5 Allied tanks. The Americans built adequate tanks. The Sherman was not the best tank of the war, but it was reliable, easy to repair, and produced in staggering numbers. 11,000 Shermans were manufactured in 1944 alone. The philosophy was different. Overwhelming numerical and logistical superiority combined with tactical flexibility would win. And it did. The captured Panther validated both approaches in a sense. It confirmed that yes, the Panther was superior in direct combat, but it also revealed that direct combat wasn't the only way to fight. The Americans didn't need to beat the Panther at its own game. They needed to change the game. Eisenhower understood this instinctively. He was a bridge player, a poker player, someone who understood that winning wasn't about having the best hand. It was about playing your hand well. The captured Panther gave him the information he needed to play the American hand better. And he did. December 19th, 1944. 21:47 hours. A cold room in Versailles. Photographs of a German tank spread across a table. A general reading an engineering report. A phone call made late at night. Orders issued before dawn. Nothing about it was glamorous, but it changed how the war was fought. And in war, that's what matters. The captured Panther, serial number 435, no longer exists. The men who studied it, who drafted the reports, who issued the orders, most of them are gone now too. But the institution they built, the capacity for learning and adaptation, remains. Wars are not won by the best equipment. They're won by the side that learns faster.